Welcome back. This is episode 7. Oh my goodness, of the Woo Curious podcast. It's Eileen here, and I'm with
Ellie and the pups.
And we're so excited to be chatting today with you and with each other about the witch wound. We felt like it was high time to address this one because it is kind of an underlying current around all of this woo curious witchery that we live in.
It sure is. It shows up in our everyday life, and it's so innocuous sometimes that we don't even know it's there.
So, the quick and dirty description of what the witch wound is inherited trauma from the burning times, a period of time in early modern Europe at the height of the witch trials, kind of between the 16th and 17th centuries. Not terribly long ago in terms of our history. We'll get into epigenetics in a little bit, but basically it was a period of time where primarily women were persecuted, and really it was a attempt to wrest control from the hands of the people who traditionally held power in the community, which would have been, the wise women, the healers, the midwives, the knowledge keepers, because knowledge is power. And so to get control of the masses, to take control out of the hands of these people, the men who were attempting to be in power started basically a smear campaign and started persecuting people for their knowledge and their knowings and their power.
Mm-hmm. And this really originated from the publication of a book called The Hammer of the Witches. And so really we can trace this back to like a single person as the author of the book that had maybe an idea or a deep imagining that the women of the world were much too powerful, and as drought happened and as crops maybe failed, that there needed to be some blame, and that blame was often the single woman who had yet to be wed or was a widow and was looking for some form of property, so to speak. And we got to point the finger at somebody. And so with the popularity of this book, of this text, we see the influx of especially women, but not exclusively women, being persecuted for our power, really, for our magical powers.
Yeah, it was about 80% of the people who were persecuted were women. And there's like a really wide range of estimates around numbers, but it was tens of thousands of people who were imprisoned, tortured, and executed. And even if you escaped execution, you were ostracized from your community, which is kind of an execution sentence in and of itself.
Shall we also talk about, I know you want to talk about epigenetics, shall we also talk about how this came to be in Salem?
Sure. And I don't know as much about Salem, so you can certainly chat about that a little bit first.
We know Salem as an area in the world where witches were also persecuted. It's not that we were just there. It's not the only place that we lived. Like our witch's address was only Salem. It's just that we had another influx of the burning times that happened in this exact location in the US. And we see that through history, the amount of persecutions were much less and for a much shorter period of time than we saw in Europe. And it was very similar. So it just took a minute for the word of the Hammer of the Witches to get out and to come across the pond, as they say. And we really see this focalized incidents happening again in this particular part of the USA. It's not that it didn't happen in other places, but we did have the public trials that happened in Salem. And that's why now we have really tourist traps in Salem to recognize, really to honor, I guess, and recognize that this was something that happened.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's very interesting because we were chatting just before we hopped on about this sense of how it affects us and why it affects us. And so you may very well, if you're listening to this, you may very well believe in reincarnation, in which case you may have lived a past life as a witch and been prosecuted directly. But even if you don't, even if you think that's hogwash, we die, we're dead, that's it, there is science, really cool science that's emerging. And you may very well have heard the term epigenetics recently because it's become a much more popular term. The idea of epigenetics is quite simple. And it basically is that our DNA, our genes are affected by our lived experiences, and that we pass that on. Those experiences get passed on. The whole idea of super slow natural selection evolution is the only thing impacting our genes is actually becoming more and more outdated. That is an impact, but we can change a lot faster than we ever thought we could. And we can pass those changes on. We can pass on emotions, even, as it were. Fear impacts our bodies. And if you think about the way that we are carried in our grandmother's wombs, because our mothers come into the world with all of their eggs already developed inside of them. And so those eggs were quite literally inside of our grandmothers. So especially strong through female lines, but obviously men too. Half of their DNA was an egg. So they were in their grandmother's bellies too. And if we look back generationally, like if we go that 400 years back to the burning times, that's about 12 generations. And 12 generations of direct ancestors is 4,094 ancestors.
Wow.
If we think about the fact that around 50,000 people were killed and another 100,000 or so imprisoned and tortured and exiled, that's a lot of people in a population that wasn't huge in Europe. So the chances are those of us with European descent or like North American descent because of the states in Salem, there's a really good chance that you quite literally carry the memory of these times in your bones.
And I think it's really key to note here that not just being associated with somebody who, may have been involved in the burning times on either side of the stake, but also living through that time. Just as we will, be living through the collective trauma over the last few years. This is not the same in any way, but the collective trauma that happened in that exact moment is also something that was passed down. I think about how my grandmother spoke about sometimes that she went through, even the depression and, times of rationing, and how that affected how we were at her home and how we made food at her home and how we did a bunch of things. So I think that it's definitely something, this collective trauma, even though it's not something that we experience directly or that necessarily our lineage experienced directly, it's definitely an indirect collective trauma that is hit as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Everybody who lived through that time was impacted by it, whether or not they were directly persecuted, because it was this fostering of mistrust between people. Like that was cultivated, the whole idea of like telling on people so that you wouldn't be told on. But they were everybody was a victim of the patriarchy, FTP, capitalism, imperialism. Like this religious tyranny is what was happening.
And we can really see, speaking of the patriarchy, that this is a direct component of the patriarchy as just another way to ensure that women were not able to practice their power, their magic, their gifts as healers, as it was a threat to the rest of society and the beliefs based in religion.
The Christian religion, very specifically in this case, it undermined the church's power. If a woman could heal you from an ailment that was a curse of God and the priest couldn't do it, how does that look on the church? And so it was really about control.
It's always about power and control.
And so this shows up for us in this witch wound, which is what we're talking about specifically here. But with reference to this, pitting people against each other, we see it in a few other wounds as well, and quite specifically the sister wound.
Shall we talk about the trinity, the holy trinity of wounds?
Yeah, let's do that.
So the next three wounds are connected to each other through collective trauma, and also became really apparent during the burning times. And so we have the direct witch wound, we have the sister wound, and we have the mother wound.
Let's talk about the sister wound, because I think it is the most apparent as far as how it is tied to the witch wound. And it really, I think we're seeing a really big shift right now of women being like, oh, wait, I want to have sisters. I want to trust and love them. But I feel like we're this generation on the cusp of this shift, because I definitely remember it was very common lingo or knowledge or whatever growing up that women were catty and they backstab each other and they can't be trusted, and it's this competition, this pitting of women against each other in from love to careers to, you know, all aspects of life.
It's extremely apparent in the yoga world, as somebody who has been in that sphere for quite some time. And we see this as a term that I call crab bucketing. If you put a bunch of crabs in a bucket, no crabs will get out of the bucket, because each crab will ensure that no crab can get out. They will pull the rest of the crabs down. So if you even try to get ahead, there will be somebody who pulls you back down. And we see this in common vernacular with our parents, with our friends, well, we don't want to make them jealous. Well, we wouldn't want to steal their thunder. We wouldn't want to step on their toes. The sister wound is really about the damage that comes from no longer seeing your sisters, your friends, your people as someone who is of equal pace to you. Instead of seeing that they have the same ability and opportunity that you have, we instead want to take their opportunity away from them. Also, we see the sisterhood wound a lot in terms of not wanting to, or being afraid to shine or be our best or do our best for fear that is going to take something away from somebody else.
For fear that it'll take something away from somebody else, but also for fear of the repercussions. Like, what will they say, right? Will they suddenly, you know, if you're shiny and visible, then people want to pull you down. And that is that visibility. Like, if you were in the burning times, you didn't want to draw any attention to yourself because it was super unsafe to do so.
And we also see this as an opportunity for you to stay small. And if you are small, if women stay small, then the patriarchy has done its job.
And a big way that they reinforce that today, you know, when obviously none of us in North America, at least, are likely to be directly persecuted for witchery in its forms, but the whole idea of scarcity, right? There's this push, and the capitalism does this really well. If you have more, that means there's less for me. And it's such a fallacy. It is not the way that the world works. Plenty begets plenty, abundance begets abundance, but it is not how we're raised. It's not what we're told. All of our little messages and turns of phrase and everything from the time we're very little are that, you know, you got to look out for yourself and hoard and keep things for yourself, but also stay small about it. Because
don't ask for too much around. But also don't take anything.
Yeah. Yeah, the sense of not enough to go around, and of the punishment for getting ahead or getting more, like for doing more and being more and showing up fully. There are real societal repercussions for it.
It's so true. It's super sneaky. I see it a lot in women who are pining over men that other women might also be pining over. I see this in women who are both too afraid to take or to apply for the promotion. I remember I spoke to somebody who said the managerial position was open in their department, and I said, you are somebody who's totally qualified for this. Like, why would you not apply for this? Well, I wouldn't want to apply because I wouldn't want to have to manage my colleagues. And, you know, that's totally rational to them. And to me, I was like, so you are going to suffer and not take more, like not get paid a higher wage, not have a higher opportunity, because you don't want to have the discord of someone maybe looking to you being like, well, you used to. This is like the toddler saying, well, you used to be cool, mom.
Right.
But now you just have all these rules, you know?
Yeah.
Really
Yeah,
honoring that
yeah.
they're in this new position, and great, like let's how can we support you step into this new role in your life, you know?
And it goes along, yeah, that sense of women in positions of power get called all sorts of nasty things when we exhibit similar leadership traits that men are praised for. We get labeled as, bossy, as cold, as bitchy, all of these things that in a man would be, powerful and direct and reserved, assertive, like all of these words that have positive associations that mean the same thing, but when applied to the different genders, it becomes a completely different connotation societally, because women are supposed to be warm and fuzzy, and we are, and we can lead that way too, but it is definitely a real fear that if you get into those positions of leadership, you will be ostracized from the community, which is fucking dangerous.
It's so dangerous. It's so dangerous. I want to continue the talk on sisterhood for a second, because I think that the amount of sister wounding that happens throughout our circles is so rampant and accepted. So we see this in high school with movies like Mean Girls. We see this in high school with crowds and how there's different castes in high school. Like if you're in this group, then you're not in that group. And the sisterhood wound really is apparent when it comes to what group you're a part of. And so if you're not a part of whatever the most ideal
Popular.
or looked upon group, the cool kids, if you're not part of the cool kids. So it really starts as part of how we create our community as children, moving up into teen years. We see this with young women who are too afraid to reach for the goals that they want. It's not just the person who won't take the managerial position. It's the woman really who doesn't take the course that they really are interested in, because they don't want to be seen as fill in the blank. It's the person who doesn't go for, whatever sports or clubs that they are really wanting to be a part of, because they don't want to be seen as blank. Like we can just fill in the blank with a bunch of descriptions of these things. And then we also see this by how, like, it's so innocuous here that how we distance ourselves from the people that we call our good friends. So either we keep a good friend around who really has a deep sister wound, who continues to put us down, who continues to create that separation, who continues to really not make life pleasant for us. I had somebody once say to me, I needed you to wait. We were progressing through a club together, and they said, I really needed you to wait for me to catch up to the same level that you are so that we could go together. And I literally was like, that's not what this is. Just because I've gone at my own pace doesn't mean that you can't go at your own pace.
It's interesting as you were speaking. I remember as a teen, even in middle school, but high school for sure, always being grateful that I wasn't part of the popular group, the popular crowd. I had a few friends who really wanted to be part of that scene. And I remember looking at them and just thinking, like, they're constantly backstabbing each other.
Yeah.
They're always talking shit about each other. And I at least had my little group of misfits. There was some of that, of course, because we were teenage girls, but there was a lot less of it. And I felt like I really, my friends were my friends and I trusted them and we loved each other. And for the most part, our trust was warranted. And it makes me think about what happens when you never get to fully be you. I had some nasty labels in high school from people who now in hindsight were probably just jealous that I was comfortable enough to express myself. Even though I was quite shy, I ended up with the nickname of Raver Slut. That was nice. Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And like I went to one rave once and wore like midriff revealing shirts because that was the style, folks. Low rise jeans and crop tops.
Where do we begin?
Yeah. Where do we begin? And I had those little LED lights that I would bring to school dances. Like,
Oh my
but
gosh.
it was threatening to this one girl who always rode the cusp. Like she was part of the in crowd, but she wasn't really accepted by them. And so I suspect that my comfort with not being part of the in crowd and lack of any kind of trying to fit in there probably really unsettled her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was definitely a lot of that in high school. I'm even thinking about how men perpetuate the separation of the sisterhood. Follow me back to my punk days. This is all coming back to my punk days. Every single episode, my friends, travel back in time with me. And I remember being at a show. It was a hardcore show. And one of the women who was a friend of mine, her name was Punk Rock Jen, she was standing at the front of the crowd and she was really upset that she was getting pushed around. And so she turned around and told them to stop. And so on a forum, somebody called her a slut, and I lost my marbles. I lost my marbles. And I heard about this. I heard the rumors that it had happened. And I started an anonymous profile. Why other people on this group just didn't realize that you didn't have to use your real name. And I named myself That Girl because everybody doesn't like that. Oh, that girl, you know? And I wrote and I said, just because a woman is standing her ground does not mean that we need to degrade her sexually. Like, this has nothing to do with her sexual preferences. This has nothing to do with her practices. She wanted to watch a show. Yeah. And so we still have that separation and that pulling apart, that crab bucketing of the sister wound by dudes because they know that it cuts. They know that it cuts.
As we were talking, I was thinking about a song that was very popular when I was in high school that came on the radio the other day, and I was like, this is horrid. The Boy Is Mine by Brandy and whoever. Like, it is awful. Yeah. I'm like, do you both not see that he's playing both of you and this is garbage and you should gang up and kick his ass? Like, both of you deserve way more than this. Don't fight each other, fight him.
I just got transported back to my days of like MTV, having a satellite dish and having MTV and watching that video. The song is now playing on loop in my head.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. It's in mine already. So I was like, come with me. Enjoy this earworm.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. Touch on it.
Let's backtrack to the witch wound for a second and talk about how that shows up in our life.
I mean, in a lot of ways, it's similar to the sister wound in that fear of being visible and shining and speaking your truth. That's a big piece, is the fear of showing up fully as you and being seen. Because being seen and showing up and being your witchy self might get you burned. It also, doubting your intuition, that is a big piece they took away from us, was that ability to distinguish between intuition and fear. And it is an interesting distinction there. Sometimes it's hard to tell about the difference between intuition and fear because they both live in your gut for the most part, right? They're both a gut sense. And sometimes your intuition is saying, don't go that way. But I think there's a really subtle difference, and it's something that a lot of us have lost. When I'm working with clients, I'll often say an intuitive feeling is like a leaning towards. And so it might be a leaning towards the not going that path, right? It might be a lean towards the other path. Whereas fear is generally like a repel, a push away from. But they're really subtle, right? Feeling like you're not enough and feeling like you're too much.
I do find this a lot with the witch wound, is this feeling that you're too much.
Like your emotions are too big. Your opinions are too loud. Your clothes are too weird. You are, too much. I very distinctly remember for most of my life, and still I fall into this trap, being super proud of the fact that I wasn't needy that I was like super low maintenance in my relationships. And men would often say, "Oh, you're not like other girls. You're so easygoing." And I took so much pride in that. And there's parts of it that I'm like, well, yeah, I don't get like bent out of shape about things that aren't a big deal often. But there's this other part where I was just suppressing my needs, constantly repressing them and my actual emotions and the way I actually felt, because I didn't want to be too much. I didn't want to be a burden or needy or, any of those things that again get really bad raps in our society. This sense of the woman who's too needy and too emotional, like that's, we all know. Anybody listening to this is like, yep.
Been there.
Done that.
I also find that the witch wound shows up as ways that we don't step into and we fear our own power. You talked about connecting to your intuition. I also see this as we hide our altars, is something that we've talked about before. We put things away in the drawer. We really hold back from expressing ourselves in that way because it feels too hot and we just stay in the broom closet. And this is something that even a few years ago, as I was speaking to some of my coaches and talking about bringing this to life, really a podcast or programs where we can express ourselves, I still had this moment of like, but what if somebody turns around to me? Like I remember distinctly telling them this, and one of them said, "What's the worst case scenario?" And it's like, what if somebody calls me a witch? And they're like, okay, is that it? And I was like, well, now that that's out in the open, yeah, I guess that was it. And I hope they call me a witch, actually.
Yeah.
So, but it's like I needed to identify that for myself before anybody else could use it as a derogatory term towards me.
Yeah, of course. You have to, it's that reclamation of titles, right?
It is
just like women have reclaimed the word bitch to some extent, right? Like saying something like "what's up bitches" is not offensive among women, generally among women, but it's funny because while we've kind of taken that term and made it okay, it still packs a punch when it's wielded in a not friendly way.
Of course.
And so, yeah, there's a ways to go with all of it. And witch is still, it's an interesting one because it's one that's just like this subcurrent. It's not as common an insult to hurl at people these days, but it still carries so much weight. And that comes back with the next generation, slightly older than us, like my mom and my mortgage broker also. Was like, yeah, that word, you might want to think about changing it. Like, you are not my target audience.
Yeah. And no, I remember you're reminding me of a conversation that I had with my mom when I was much younger, and she said something along the lines of like somebody being a witch and meaning them being a bad person. And although my mom speaks ill of no one, it was in reference to something else that was being talked about. I remember in that moment, I'm having this core memory come back because I was a teenager where I went like, oh, it's not a good thing to be a witch. Like you're a bad person if you're a witch. You're bad, you're evil. That as well is part of the witch wound that comes up.
It's like a moral judgment. A lot of these words that get applied to women to implicate them as being bad or evil, it's a moral implication.
The things that I have to say about being called a slut.
Oh my gosh.
What an honor.
Right?
To be so embodied.
Yeah.
That you called me. Why, thank you.
I really enjoy my body and my sensuality and my sexuality. And that's tough.
Thank you for seeing me.
Yeah.
It's true. And we hurl the insults that we know are cutting. And why are they cutting? Why are they cutting? Because of the witch wound, because of the mother wound. The slut is so insulting because of the mother wound. Because we're either the Madonna, the all-encompassing great mother, or we're the whore. Yeah. There's no in between. We can't be both.
No.
So shall we move to the mother wound?
We shall.
Have you noticed how this shows up?
as you just pointed out, that sense of you're a mother or you're a slut certainly is a piece of it. And then there's the other piece of this, the wound. I think every woman I've ever spoken to has this sense of this tension in their relationship with their mother. And my mentor, Nadine, actually speaks to this sense of deep betrayal that our infant selves feel when we are separated from our mothers, right? Like we had everything we needed inside. We were always fed, we were always warm, we always felt safe. Not to say that everybody's in utero experience was blissful, because we know a lot about, fear and stress impacting babies in utero, but then we are taken from that space and suddenly we're separate from our mothers, and there's a wounding in that. We are no longer a part of her body. She can put us down and leave the room. And I can't remember the teaching that Nadine gave around why this shows up differently for men than for, like, men tend to be just grateful that they get to be with their moms, and women are mad. And it has something to do with our own ability to carry children as well. And that sense of, but I had everything I needed. Why would you take that from me?
Right.
And yeah, so there's that sense. And obviously the direct way that our mother's own wounding really impacts us in the way that she cares for us to the best of her abilities, in the way that the way her mother cared for her impacted the way she can mother. It's just this long line of wounding.
A long line of wounding. I see this a lot with people, with women especially, who are so concerned with being the good girl. And again, these are innocuous actions that we take of, we've made the decision that no, the right thing to do is to be a servant of our family. It is the woman in the relationship, depending on what relationship this is. We can get into the dynamics of this as we go further along. But that often says, like, I want to be the good wife.
Mm-hmm.
Like
And good is so insidious.
It is. It is. And it's something that, be a good girl. Okay, be a good girl and pull up to the table. Be a good girl and cross your legs. Be a good girl and don't play in the dirt. Be a good girl. Like, we're just told constantly as we grow up to be a good girl and what that expectation is. And then we also see within the mother wound here is that we have the complete opposite of things, which is sexual promiscuity in an unhealthy way. I am all here as a sacred pleasure priestess to tell you, be promiscuous, please. And that we see this as a detriment, or within the addiction side of things, that promiscuity can really surface because of a mother wound.
And it's an extension of that good girl. It's that seeking to be valued from outside of yourself. And I know that came into play for me for sure in my late teens and early 20s, that sense of like validation and yes, I am worthy and cool and good because I am able to attract attention from the opposite sex. It's a very messy tangle.
It's a very messy tangle. I also see this as how we make decisions in life that are supposed to be the right decision. Like, we've been the woman who is trying so hard to get it right. That perfectionism is so deep with the mother wound. They walk hand in hand, because we are trying to do all of the right things for what reward we're not quite sure, for acceptance, for eternal love, to never disappoint our parents, those sorts of things. I had a big disappointment wound with my family, with my parents. And so I constantly have to check in with myself. Am I doing this because I want to, or am I doing this because I'm afraid to disappoint them? Because disappointing them would be the worst thing I could do for them.
It's interesting because overtly there was never a like, you must do well to be good. But I think my mom likes to blame herself for all sorts of things. And she said to me once that she regrets always giving me such high praise when I did well in school, because she suspects that may have contributed to my need to be perfect and to continue to excel, to the point of, putting myself through stresses that, C's get degrees, but not for Eileen. A pluses get degrees. And there could very well be some truth to that. Like, oh, when I do well, I get attention. I don't think they were withholding attention otherwise. Like, I'm pretty okay with my childhood, but there are these little moments that you wonder, did that have that repercussion, that long lasting effect? Why did I have that crazy drive to make sure I was the best and to know all the things and to be perfect?
And then I find the last part, thank you for sharing that. First of all, like, what an insight right there. What an insight. The next part of the mother wound that I really notice is that the archetype of the mother is like unconditional devotional love, but it's also all consuming. We will take what we have given, and the true archetype of the divine mother that contributes to this mother wound is never being enough to get the devotional love and the unconditional love, never being enough, and then being so much that we will be all consumed by the mother. And this is both archetypally and in our manifest world here. We see that for different reasons, some mothers really rely on their children to give them what they couldn't get, to be their best friend, to be the person, to be the gymnastic star that they were never able to be.
And we should say mothers rely on their daughters for that.
Exactly. And again, it's this innocuous thing. This sometimes shows up as very, very apparently, it shows up in narcissistic personality disorders, and how the reliance on the child to perform, and the performance of the child then dictates or determines actually the worthiness of the parent.
Yeah.
So yeah, that other wound, these wounds are vast. You are touched by them, if not all three of them, throughout your life.
None of us get away without experiencing them in some way, shape, or form. And we don't want to leave you with just the ick. I'm conscious of how our time is going, and so I'd love for us to touch a little bit on some of the ways that we can heal these wounds. We probably won't go deep into them, or this will be a 2-hour episode. But do you feel like there's anything else you want to add to the wounds and the ick before we shift?
No, let's shift. I want you to tell me about cultivating some gratitude.
Yeah. So this is something that for me comes up a lot in my, like, the coaching side of my coaching and healing, because it is a bit of a more cognitive process. But this recognition that behavior patterns, any traits, any personality characteristics that we carry that are not helpful for us once were helpful. So it's like a mindset piece, right? You are very unlikely to shift something if you are blaming or shaming yourself for it. Much like punishment is a terrible way to change a behavior in an animal, in a person, we're animals. Positive reinforcement is a much, much better way to change a behavior. Same goes for changing beliefs, changing habits. If we beat ourselves up for our shittinesses, we're never going to get past them. So the first step in healing anything or shifting anything is to cultivate gratitude for that belief, for that wound, for that trait, because at some point in this life or a previous life, it kept us safe, right? Having a sister wound and being mistrusting of your neighbor kept you safe from being executed or extradited. And so that first step, as hard as it is, because they don't feel like nice things, is recognizing that it served a purpose, and it was a purpose that needed to be there to keep you or somebody that you are descended from or your past self safe. So if we can cultivate gratitude and thank it, and then politely say, you know what, though, you can take a back seat. I don't need you now anymore. That's a really powerful tool to start to shift.
I've got this now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you
I
so
do
much.
love that piece of gratitude. I think that that's something that we really miss. We try to, especially in the therapeutic sphere, we're trying to get rid of it as fast as possible. We're just trying to like stuff it down, stuff it out, get it out as quickly as we stuffed it down. And I think that showing some gratitude for why it showed up is a beautiful, beautiful practice for beginning to heal. This also leads us into things like somatic healing, which is a really powerful tool for these wounds, because often it's so unconscious that we don't even know what's happening. We don't even know it's happening. We just know that there's some form of discord that we are feeling. And a somatic practice is so good to actually not have to touch the wound, but just to give the wound a pathway forward in another direction. And I think that's really the beauty of somatic healing for myself.
And for people who may be like, what is somatic healing? It is any kind of healing work that gets you into your body and out of your head. So it's embodiment work, things like breath work, things like ecstatic dance, movement practices. And there are somatic coaches. And energy healing is another way to get into that space, right? That sense of releasing the stuck energies, the old trauma bonds that might live somewhere in there, releasing cords. I don't do cord cutting in my practices because there's a sense of, what's at the other end. Like, we have to be really cautious and careful and tender with the cords that we have, because there's a reason they're there, again, much like our wounds. But I do often facilitate a process of releasing and letting go of a cord. It's like a collaborative process with me and the energy body of the person I'm working with and on, to help them release a cord and be like, no, thank you, but I don't need this anymore, with love.
With love. I had a really powerful energy healing session on Friday, actually. And it was definitely around part of the witch wound and a part of the sister wound. And it is surprising to me, as something that I had gone to therapy for many years, and a topic at hand that came up several times in therapy sessions, like the main topic at hand. It came up again in my energy healing session, and it feels so cleared now, cleared out of the body, as a way to move forward with work and with the podcast, say, for example, and how I can step into a greater version of myself. Like that, again, we have these moments where we're keeping ourselves safe, guarded for this reason. And that feeling, that stretch, like these clothes don't fit me anymore. I need bigger clothes. And going through an energy healing session for me is just pure magic, pure magic.
Yeah. Oh, I love that sense that you said, like, of stepping up and out. I had two little things fell into my brain as you were saying that. And one was, so in labor, when you're in the second stage of labor, that's the pushing stage, especially with a first baby, there's a lot of effort involved. And as baby descends through your pelvis, we always talk about, it's like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward. And it's that slow opening, the gentle stretching of those tissues and the bone structures as this baby makes its way earthside. And it's very similar when you're stepping into a new identity and being like, okay, I can show up as, oh, no, maybe not yet. Oh, a little bit more. Oh, well, that felt uncomfortable. So it feels like this kind of rocking back and forth as we step into claiming these new identities.
It's so true. It's so true. That rocking back and forth is exactly what this is. Another way that we can heal the wounds, the trifecta, but heal the witch wound especially, is building trusting friendships. And this is, I think, something that we don't put enough emphasis on is both thanking and releasing anybody in our life who does not make us feel safe. Thank you for what you have taught me.
Mm-hmm.
And looking for new friends. And I think that, as we age, there is a belief that it's harder to make friends. And I am going to debunk this belief. It's harder to make friends only when we don't know what it is that we're looking for.
Yeah.
And that, I think, when we are clear with what we're looking for in friendship, we no longer settle for the shitty friendships that are just digging up and poking at our sisterhood and witch wound, and for that matter, the mother wound that we have. So building these trusting friendships, I think, is really key as part of our healing for these wounds.
Yeah, and a lot of that comes to recognizing when we fall into that people-pleasing mode too, and trying to be the good girl, because so often we'll end up with friendships that are one-sided, or where the other person really learns to depend on us for everything, and it's not healthy for us, and it can be really hard to extricate yourself from some of those friendships. But reciprocity, the sign of a good friend, is one who gets excited about your boundaries. They're cheering you on for that, rather than feeling hurt or like upset that you are no longer their doormat. And the last way that we'll touch on for today, that maybe you find some of these friendships to build trust in, but also to just start to cultivate and especially heal that sister wound and witch wound, is sitting in circle with other women, holding sacred space in the form of a circle where everybody gets heard and everybody is seen and held, can be really, really healing. It makes us feel less alone. It gives us that sense of community and reinforces the interconnectedness between us. And it's an ancient practice. Women have been sitting in circle forever. I'm pretty sure it was you, Ellie, you said that women in circle will start the revolution. Yeah.
As I clap over here. Yes, we will.
Yes, we will.
Yes, we will.
Fuck the patriarchy.
Fuck the patriarchy. I will sit with my sisters, okay?
Yeah.
I want to speak to this a little bit, actually. I want to share a personal anecdote around sitting in circle with sisters and the sister wound, and addressing women as sisters or beloved. Oh my gosh, one of my favorite ways to address people in my sphere is just beloved. The kindness and love that comes from that is just exquisite. But for years, I followed the current focalizer of the 13 Moon Mystery School that I am a part of, and her name is Elaine Kalila Dowdy. And I followed her for years and years, and I really stood back when I saw her speak, because there was a distrust that I felt when I witnessed her. And I pride myself on being a good judge of character. And as somebody who really taps into my intuition, there was something that still drew me to her. Like, my intuition was like, go further. And my judgment was like, who does she think she is? Who is she? And
which one?
When we start to notice those entitlement judgments that we have, it's, for me, it has been such a great way for me to say, okay, what's really here? What's really going on? So I witnessed her in ceremony for some time before I put my hand up to work with her. And I remember the difference between prior to joining the Priestess Presence training and after. The very first time I saw her speak, after I had actually put my hand up to say, yes, I do want to be a part of this, as instead of just the lurker, just the observer, the voyeur of what's going on, I saw her in such a different light of, oh, this is what embodiment means. And I remember having a conversation with one of my besties around this, sitting on her couch and saying, I can see myself as the person who has this distrust now, Like I can finally see the wound for myself. I haven't healed it yet. I can finally recognize it for myself. And I want more. I want more exposure to this. What's this doing for me? And it is an interesting thing to be both the witnesser of your emotions and the feeler of what's going on here. So as we've progressed, it's been a really great opportunity for me to continue to work with her. It is so good to be on the other side of that, to understand that, of course, that kept me safe for a reason, because I wasn't fully ready to be embodied myself. And so coming back to the energy healing, part of what we worked on was the embodiment of the teachings that I have. And we have been taught, the patriarchy in particular has taught us to fear women with knowledge, with innate knowledge.
Yeah.
We must have learned this from somebody else. And innate knowledge is really, you can learn, you can sit at the feet of your teacher, but that innate knowledge comes when you are embodied in the knowledge that you have. And so it has been a really curious journey for me to go from the side of things where there's something where there's something, is it performative? Is it distrust? What's going on here? This distrust of embodiment that we have. And I think that this comes back to the immediacy of using the word slut or whore when we encounter a woman who is embodied in her sexual and sensual energy. Like they must be loose or a floozy or whatever we want to call them, because the only way they're going to have that knowledge is going outside of themselves.
Right.
And
it
needing
leads
that
to
validation.
Yeah. And it leads to a mistrust in our own embodiment. I think it's part of why so many of us struggle to be embodied, because there is that fear, of then being called all of those words, but also of like, it doesn't feel safe to be embodied. So we're like floating heads so much of the time in our lives.
The somatics, breathwork, energy healing, energy healing, energy healing. This is the recipe. So yeah, it's really interesting for me to see, as I conversed with this woman around the embodiment piece. I said, she was a threat to me. She was a total threat for me to witness her like this. And for this gal to really soften into, oh, this is what's going on. So we don't often know immediately, like what's happening here.
Recognizing it is the first step. It doesn't mean it's going to disappear when you recognize it. I think I've encountered this a lot over the last year of this entrepreneurial journey. It is so ingrained to comparisonitis, right? That sense of, oh, they're succeeding and I'm not. And that feels bad, that jealousy. And so this year has been really eye-opening for me in terms of celebrating the wins and the success of other women and consciously shifting my mind away from that scarcity. They're succeeding and therefore there is less success for me. It's the same, like another side of that same coin, right? Seeing women in their power feels threatening.
It sure does. And once we heal that, it feels liberating. Anything else that you want to add from our session this morning?
I feel like we did a nice job of touching on it all and coming around full circle. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what you've got coming up for people in the next few weeks, few months, whatever?
I do. So this weekend for my birthday, I got to see the Taylor Swift Eras tour at the drive-in. And it was fantastic. And so now, as the embodied T-Swizzle fan that I am, I'm not sure I'm ready to call myself a Swiftie. I don't have a bracelet yet. So maybe that's whenever I am anointed as a Swiftie at that point. But we are now in the era. Everything is being thought of as an era. And so we are now in the era of sacred pleasure, my friends. Step right up. Come to a seat at the table with me. By the time this airs, we are going to be most of the way through a Sacred Pleasure Challenge, and it's not too late to join. So the Sacred Pleasure Challenge is a 10-day challenge that I'm hosting in my free community on Facebook called the Matriarch Collective. And every day there is a little taster of ways for you to embody your sacred pleasure. And so if you're interested in this, you can come back and join us. There's also, for completing the challenge, there's also an entry to win an intuitive coaching session with me, which I'm very excited about. And then on November 14th, I am in the Sacred Essentials, which is the breathwork facilitator, Kyla, that we talked about previously, her private membership. But I've been given an opportunity to invite others to this talk on sacred pleasure. So this is going to be a master class on sacred pleasure, and it is going to just be exquisite, is really what it is. A little later in the month, dates TBD, in November, we will have a sacred pleasure ceremony, and December 3rd, I will be having a sacred pleasure retreat with Kyla and another friend of ours, Andrea, who's just the most brilliant writing coach. And we're going to do a day retreat, women only, on the island, pure magic.
Pure magic. I am like so jealous that I do not live out there for that one. I want to be there so badly.
It's going to be good.
I just want to note that entirely without planning it wasn't in our notes. The episode that we just did, all about sister wounding and witch wounding, we shouted out all of our beautiful, amazing female entrepreneur friends who are doing amazing things, because it's not a competition, folks. When we rise together.
Yes.
Yeah.
What do you have going on in the next couple of weeks?
Okay, so this week that this is airing, the doors are open to the next round of Unleash Your Inner Witch. We start next week on Tuesday. And I'd like to mention too, if the time of the live classes doesn't work, most of the people who've taken this round have not attended any of the sessions live. They've just been catching the replays, and the feedback has still been really good. So I do think there's a lot of value in this course, whether or not you can show up live. So that doors are open. You can hop on over to my website and sign up if you want. If you're on the fence, you're wanting a little more taste of what I'm doing, I am hosting a witch wound masterclass this week as well on Thursday. There's going to be a decent amount of repetition from this episode. So just as a heads up, that is a lot of the topic have been covered here, but there's definitely some there that hasn't been. I'll be leading us through a guided witch wound healing activation visualization at the beginning. So if you wanted to sign up for that, you certainly can come to that. And then soul council sessions are ongoing. The price goes up on the 10th or after the 10th of November, so still a little bit of time. You don't have to book your actual session before the 10th if you're wanting to catch that price. You can book ahead, however many weeks ahead, but the cost will go up for booking after the 10th. And I think those are the things. I'll be inside the Sacred Essentials in December as well, talking about cyclical living. I can't remember the date though. There's lots of time to come to that. But yeah, those are the three main things. Unleash Your Inner Witch, soul council sessions. I'm always available for energy healing if you're needing a little bit of loving up.
I love this. Okay, Woo Crew. That concludes our episode. If you loved this, go ahead over to wherever you listen to this podcast and leave us a 5-star review. And come follow us on Instagram at the Woo Curious Podcast. We're there sharing funny anecdotes from the episodes and all sorts of other witchy memes in our stories. Come follow us. And thank you so much for listening to this episode.
Thank you. And we'll catch you next week.
I'll see you next week.